So it seems absolutely insane that conference championship weekend is already here. And in my opinion, the only thing crazier than that is how we got there. This college football season has truly been the gift that just keeps on giving, and I think we're going to see that continue through conference championship weekend. Today, we need to sit down and talk about the SEC championship game, a game where Georgia is set to take on LSU, but a game that I think once we start diving into the details, there are several really intriguing matchups I can't wait to talk about. Before we can, as always, y'all know the drill. I need to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me an L for LSU or a G for Georgia, letting me know who you think comes out of this game victorious. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification as I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed this content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions are massive. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. And like I said in the intro, I think that once we start really unpacking some of this, there are several matchups in this game I'm going to be watching closely. And I'd really like to start with talking about LSU, because LSU has been a bit of a surprising team this year. I think those that understand who LSU is kind of knew that even with a coaching change, this is still a team you have got to take serious. LSU has got such a dense collection of talent, and Brian Kelly is an individual that's had success in college football. He's someone that's made it to the college football playoffs, and I understand we can talk about what happened once Notre Dame and those Brian Kelly teams got to the college football playoffs, and that's a fair conversation. But the fact of the matter is they made it. And that's something that's proved to be very difficult just to get to the dance. So whenever you have an understanding of the talent LSU has, and they got a coach that has college football playoff experience, the future seemed to look up for the Tigers. The question was, how long is it going to take to get there? The answer, not as long as I think some people anticipated. Because this year's been really special for the LSU fans. They've gotten to see their team fight, grow throughout the entirety of the year, and they got to watch Brian Kelly beat Nick Saban in his first year in the SEC in an absolute nail-biter of a game. Fast forward to now, and the only real big blemish on LSU's record is the loss they just sustained against Texas A&M. A game that is always down to the wire every time those two teams play. It seems like it's magic, but inevitably, A&M's having a real down year. Brian Kelly and LSU were having a real up year. They had lost some games, but inevitably, you expected them to drop a game or two because of all of the new on that LSU team. But that A&M loss, that's one that stung. But fast forwarding into this weekend, I think there's a lot of people that are going to completely write off LSU against Georgia. And look, let's be very fair here and transition and talk about Georgia a little bit. This has been a team that seemingly hasn't missed a beat ever since that national championship game. And really, we can go back a little bit further to the first round of the playoffs where they dismantled Michigan en route to a national championship. Ever since then, this Georgia team hasn't missed a beat. And I know they've played in close games this year. They've had several games where they should have handled an opponent quicker than they did or easier than they did. But the end of the day, they're still undefeated. And when we look around college football, I think you'd be hard-pressed to give me a team that didn't have struggle games this year. That's just kind of been this year's mantra in college football. Georgia has weathered the storm, and they're sitting here undefeated. And when we really start diving into what Georgia does that makes them so difficult, there's a lot for us to talk about. And I know a lot of people are probably going to be drawn to the defense, and deservedly so. What Kirby, Smart, and staff have done on that defense is truly special. But guys, do not dismiss that Georgia offense, and that's really where I'd like to start this breakdown. Georgia's offense against LSU's defense, because this is going to be the matchup I'm most interested in. And for LSU's defense, it's really about one player. As much talent as they have on that defense, and they really do, specifically Harold Perkins. Harold Perkins has been a bright spot for LSU, but has been a real bright spot for college football. He's one of the most gifted players in the entirety of the game, and I am so interested to see how this LSU defense is going to scheme him to try and affect Stetson Bennett and the Georgia offense. What do you want to do with your absolute chess piece in Harold Perkins? Are you going to assign him to cover those tight ends? Are you going to try and get him to make Stetson Bennett uncomfortable? What's the game plan going to be? And personally, I think they're going to be switching it up on the fly. They don't want Stetson Bennett and this Georgia offense to get keyed in on what LSU's best player defensively, in my opinion, is going to do. I think they're going to be switching him around, making sure that Stetson Bennett is thinking about every play before it happens, just to add in a layer of complication. But the real issue for LSU's defense, in my opinion, is how are you going to take away all of these weapons? Because when we really start looking into Georgia's numbers on the offensive side of the ball, it gets really interesting. They have 3 running backs who are all averaging over 5 yards per carry. That right there is impressive. They might not have a 1,000-yard rusher, but they have 2 guys that are over 600 yards and a guy that's not far behind him, all of which are averaging over 5 yards per carry. That is very impressive. On top of that, when we start diving into the receiving stats for the Georgia Bulldogs, what we find is Brock Bowers is the leading receiver, which I don't think surprises anybody. Brock Bowers may be a tight end, but that dude is going to be an absolute steal, even though I think he's going to be a first-round lock in the NFL draft. The way he plays the tight end position, every NFL team with a receiving need or a tight end need is going to be clamoring to try and get him in their room, and for good reason. We have seen him be just a thorn in the side of defenses for years now, and people really still don't know how to account for him. And the reason they really don't know how to account for him, you can pool your resources to stopping Brock Bowers, and that's all well and good. McConkey is still on the outside, and he is having a really good year. He comes in as Georgia's number 2 wide receiver. The thing that makes it so difficult in stopping Georgia's offense is how balanced they are. And I'm giving you all of this for good reason. Guys, Brock Bowers is the leading receiver, so a tight end is Georgia's number 1 in receiving yards. A wide receiver is number 2 in receiving yards, and a running back is number 3 in receiving yards. I give you that because if you're LSU and you're trying to figure out where you're going to put Harold Perkins, it's important to know what Georgia does well, how they've been able to affect teams offensively, and whenever you start diving into that, they've been able to do so at every different layer, whether it's tight end, receiver, or running back, and that's just in the passing game. So already, I think if you're Georgia, you have got to like the matchups Todd Monken is going to be able to generate, and that's another guy who's probably not getting the praise he deserves. Monken is having a fantastic time with the Georgia Bulldogs. Very excited to see what happens. But let's not pretend like this isn't an LSU defense that's going to not fight. This is an LSU defense that has shown us they're going to fight for every single play. I'm really interested to see how LSU is going to start taking away some of these weapons. Because if you are able to nullify Brock Bowers, well, the problem now arises that they have another guy in that tight end room, DeAndre Washington, who's 6'7", who is an absolute mismatch. I've contended for quite some time, Georgia has the most loaded tight end room in the nation, and if I was them, I'd be running 12 personnel all the time just so you could prove to me you can stop it. I mean, I would be real ornery. I would never get out of 12 personnel just to flex my muscles and prove to college football, yeah, you're going to have a long, long day playing me. So it's up to LSU to piece this together. And that's why I say whenever we start talking about these matchups, it gets really interesting. LSU's defense has had a bit more success against the pass than they have against the run. And whenever we look at some of the games LSU has played, it's been telling, especially the game they just got out of where A-Chain had over 200 yards on the ground. And if we go to the game against Alabama where they beat the Tide, well, Jahmyr Gibbs was 1 yard away from a 100-yard day on 15 carries. I think Georgia is going to be able to get what they want through the ground to set up what they want through the air. And if you're LSU, if you cannot stop Georgia's ability to run the football, I think you're in trouble. And now we need to flip the script, because if in the event LSU cannot stop Georgia running the football, I think that leads Georgia to being able to have more flexibility in their passing game. And that becomes more problematic when we look at LSU's offense, and I don't think this is an offense that's just super explosive. They've been a consistent grinding offense, but I wouldn't qualify them as an explosive, score-quick offense, get points on the board, and we can win a shootout. And the reason I say this is because they have relied on Jaden Daniels to do so much. And he's a guy that when you look at his numbers alone, you might not think he's had a great year. Turn on the tape. LSU is relying on that young man for a whole lot in this offense. When we look at the 12 games LSU has played, Jaden Daniels has been the leading rusher for the Tigers in 7 of those games. So if you're Georgia, if you can take away the threat of Jaden Daniels rushing the football, now you're making them beat you by passing the ball. And I think Georgia is going to learn from Alabama's mistakes. For whatever reason, Alabama trotted out a 1-4-6 defense against LSU with no quarterback spies against one of the most efficient running quarterbacks in all of college football. Alabama had no answer for him. They decided not to try and use a spy, and Jaden Daniels was able to get first downs at will. I cannot imagine there's a scenario where Georgia will adopt that game plan because it just doesn't make sense. Georgia will have a spy on Jayden Daniels, and their whole deal, in my opinion, is going to be, we're going to take away all rushing threat from LSU. We're going to make you beat us through the air. And even though, if we're looking at what Georgia does best on defense, it's taking away the run. They're not as good in stopping the pass. I just think that when you look at that front they have, they're going to be hard-nosed. We're going to take away any threat of the run because when we look at LSU's offense, their passing game is somewhat predicated on their ability to generate a running game. You can take that away. Now you're getting them to play your style of football. So at the end of this, I know we've had a whole long soliloquy, and it sounds like LSU doesn't have hope, but make no mistake, this is a very talented team, and if you're an LSU fan, you need to be very excited about where your program is trending. Brian Kelly came in and had just about as good of a year one as you could have hoped outside of that A&M game. And even then, I think if we would have talked about before the season that LSU would lose to A&M, there'd be a lot in the LSU fan base that would look at the talent of that A&M team and say, yeah, you know what, we could probably see that. It's just because of how A&M's season has gone and how LSU lost to A&M that loss is a little bit of a blemish, but let's be very forthright here. Brian Kelly's had a really solid year. I don't think there was anybody that was picking LSU in Brian Kelly's first year to be playing for an SEC championship game, and here they are. So could they upset the Dogs? Sure, I think they absolutely could. If Jayden Daniels starts cooking and Georgia has no way to slow him down, this could be a long game for Georgia because the way LSU's offense is predicated, they can grind you down. And if they start getting the rushing game going, they have the ability to beat you with some of their wide receivers. And that's an area where we've seen teams attack Georgia this year. It's all about stopping that rushing attack for Georgia. And I know that's what they do best, but in my opinion, when we look at this LSU offense, their passing game is predicated off of their running game. Take their running game away, now you're asking them to play into your hands. When we look at what Georgia has done on offense, this is a really tough offense to stop. And I know there are going to be a bunch of people sitting there and saying, oh, well, Stetson Bennett is Stetson Bennett. Yeah, guess what? He's leading the Georgia Bulldogs to another amazing season, and we're having the conversation of if anybody can beat them. So we can talk about how we view Stetson Bennett, but at the end of the day, he's throwing for a lot of yards. He's not making bad decisions. He's making the right decisions. What more do you want from a guy? The guy is going out there and playing football and putting his team in a position to win. There's nothing you can take away from that. Absolutely nothing. Georgia is a tough team to stop because of the personnel they field. When you look at the running back room, they might not have a guy that we're typically used to seeing that when we think of a Nick Chubb or a Sony Michel, but they have a room that is very capable, and they've shown all year they're going to use them. Like I said, 3 guys over 5 yards per carry, and then when we look at the way they're utilizing their receiver threats, the number 1 receiver on their team is a tight end, the number 2 is a wide receiver, and the number 3 is a running back. So if you're a defense trying to figure out where to go to stop this Georgia offense, good luck. They're attacking teams in every different way, and they've been doing it successfully. Am I saying they have the most explosive offense in the nation? No, but they haven't needed it. They've been able to just beat teams because teams cannot account for some of the personnel they have. Specifically, teams have no answer for that tight end room. Very interested to see how LSU is going to utilize Harold Perkins and some of the insane athletes they have to try and find that answer. More importantly, can't wait to hear from you. I'll give my prediction right now before we get out of here. As much as I think it would be cool to see LSU pull off an upset just because it would be the biggest storybook ending for LSU, I just don't see it, and it's for all the reasons I laid out. Georgia, whenever we really dive into how their offense is being successful, it's a little bit wild in what they're able to do and how little acknowledgement Todd Monken is truly getting. I think that guy needs to be getting a lot more press than he currently is. Can't wait to hear from all of you. Now, as for my personal prediction on this game, I have the Georgia Bulldogs winning it, and it's for all the reasons I've listed. Whenever we look at Georgia's offense, whether they're hurting defenses, running the football, using their running backs in the passing game, using their tight ends, or their wide receivers, they've just had a lot of success in multiple different ways affecting a defense. And defensively, even though the Georgia Bulldogs lost so many people off last year's national championship defense, Jalen Carter and the Dawgs are right there as one of the nation's best defenses. And it's going to be tough for LSU to piece them together, especially if Georgia's able to take away the run from LSU, because that's how so much of their offense is based. And yes, I know, earlier in this video I just said, yeah, there's a way that LSU could win. That's because this is football, and we've seen upsets happen in the past, and that's why the game is played. So I'm not going to tell you, no, there's zero chance LSU to win this game. But I think if we're looking at this holistically, the Georgia Bulldogs are a favorite, and they're a favorite for good reason. As fun as this game's going to be, Georgia's just been insane this year, and I can't wait to hear from y'all. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.